And wouldn't it be nice and within our range of ability to demote Mercury so that we don't have to 3 times a year start freaking out about this little planet going backwards, that it would be just in time. Anyhow, I'm not saying that it would matter, but it was a delightful little piece of, conjecture, and I enjoyed it, and so I'm sharing it with you.
Yeah, and I think a bigger piece of conjecture is, don't blame Mercury retrograde. That, we're either going to live with astrology as a means for sailing through life in healthy and happy ways, or we're going to use it as something that we can hide behind. And astrology is very tricky in that sense, because it so skillfully reflects our life experiences. It's very tempting to want to run and hide under certain astrological conditions. Rick has written an article, it's on stariq.com, about Mercury retrograde, which he talks about. He brings up a point I've never heard anywhere else, and that is when Mercury is retrograde, it's closer to the Earth than at any other time. So proximity usually means that the broadcast gets louder, not that it disappears. And Rick's theory is basically that we've got too much noise with Mercury retrograde, that when the planet of data and communications is so close to the Earth, perhaps we're overwhelmed. So the idea isn't, I think, to make excuses, but to perhaps recognize what you're thinking about, what you're assimilating, what you're working on that maybe is not digestible for you right now. And if it's not, wait till Mercury goes direct, take another look then, and perhaps that will be an appropriate time to get moving with whatever subject you put on hold.
Yeah, I think that we astrologers often get phone calls or emails from people who say, I've been looking to buy a house for 3 years. I just found my dream house, but I noticed that Mercury went retrograde yesterday. Should I wait 3 weeks before making an offer? And my response is, well, is it a good house? And will it still be on the market in 3 weeks? And are you doing this out of panic, or are you doing this because it makes sense? Because as Jeff just described, what happens is that often when Mercury is retrograde, the reason why we make stupid decisions is that the communication lines are so busy, like rush hour, that we think we have to do it right now. I can't tell you how many times I get calls or discussions with people who under a Mercury retrograde bought a car that 3 days later they wish they hadn't bought. And they bought it because one morning they decided, I think I'm interested in buying a car. And that afternoon they were driving along and they passed a car lot where they saw a car of their favorite color and they went in and bought the damn thing. Because somehow it was like the pressure and the sense of urgency is so great that we try to push things too hard, too much, too far, too fast. And so the trick, or that's not a trick, the practice with Mercury or any planet retrograde is to sink into it and to work with the energy and to give it time to see what happens rather than acting out of panic. And let's not forget that not only Mercury comes close to Earth and goes retrograde, but all true planets do, meaning the sun and the moon don't. And right now, we are in kind of an interesting place cosmically, because we have Jupiter retrograde and Uranus retrograde, and they're doing an interesting dance that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But also, Chiron is retrograde and Neptune is retrograde. So we really have 5 planets that in some ways are over-amping or stirring the waters a little more than they usually do, which presents its own, did someone say 6? Did I miss one? Oh, and Pluto. Well, Pluto isn't a real planet. No. And Pluto. But I'll tell you, unlike Ceres, who was a planet and then was, dismissed and created into an asteroid, Pluto actually likes being excluded because the hell realms gain power when you're in denial of them. When you become aware of things that are unconscious or unknown, they become less scary and you're able to work with them. So Pluto really digs being no longer a planet, just for the record.
Yeah, and while it is interesting that we've got, if you include Chiron, 6 bodies that are retrograde right now, the outer planets are retrograde almost 40% of the time.
Right.
So individually, it's not an uncommon thing. Now, what a retrograde offers is the opportunity to redo. And I think the best piece of advice I've ever heard about retrograde planets, whether they're transiting through the sky for all of us, or whether it's something that you have in your birth chart, is that internal reference comes first and then external action. If all we do during the retrograde of Mercury is simply take another moment to reflect before we speak, before we make a major decision, that certainly can't do any harm. And there's a good chance, which is true all the time, that a second thought might keep us from making a first stupid action. Retrograde periods just give us another chance to look at those things. And by the way, maybe you know that idea that if that one of the definitions of mental illness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting to get different results. Well, I think that's especially true with Mercury retrograde in its analytical home earth sign Virgo, which can tie the mind up into tighter and smaller knots. And if those knots, if those places where you're tying up your mind are familiar places, we have repeated those same mantras over and over and over again, that's not likely to cut that Gordian knot and free you from the past. Going back and revisiting the past is worthwhile when we bring the mind of the present and an eye toward the future so that it could be lived differently. And I think that's the fairest litmus test of the appropriate use of Mercury retrograde or any retrograde planet.
One of the things that's interesting right now with Mercury retrograde in, as Jeff said, his or its, because Mercury isn't a his or a her.
It's a both.
It's a both. Mercury goes both ways.
Right.
Which is really what the key to Mercury is. Understanding that from Earth's point of view, there's the sun out there, and the Mercury going around it. In the sky, it looks like it goes like this. We don't get that depth motion. In other words, it's really going like this, but Mercury, from the observational point of view, simply goes both ways. Duh. And that's what communication is about. It's about receiving information and giving information. Communication is not a one-way street. Communication goes both ways. And interestingly, today we have the moon in Gemini, which is Mercury's other key sign. Because in astrology, signs are related to planets, and so we have Gemini, that is Mercury, that Mercury is the ruling planet of Gemini, and Virgo. Mercury is the ruling planet of Virgo. And here's the interesting thing. Gemini, Mercury, is just about connecting. It's just about going back and forth. It's about connecting the dots and about interacting. But as Jeff alluded to, Earth means practical, down to earth. And in Gemini, when Mercury is in Gemini and now even doubled or squared because it's retrograde in Gemini, when Mercury is in Virgo and now even doubled or squared because it's retrograde in Virgo, there's not this interest in just connecting information. It's wanting to discriminate. Remember, Virgo is the maiden holding the wheat that separates out the useful wheat that we can turn into bread from the chaff that has no use at all and we throw away. And so Mercury in Virgo's job is to separate out the information that we can use from the noise.
That's really a good picture, and it also relates to the fact that the sun, the driving force of light and life for us here on Earth, is also in Virgo until the 22nd of this month. Virgo is known as a sign of analysis. It's also known as a sign of worry. And the fundamental question, again, with the sun in Virgo and Mercury in Virgo is, if you're worrying about something, can you apply those thoughts in some kind of constructive way? Identifying problems is valuable if it's a step towards moving towards solution. And certainly with the sun in Virgo this month, it's an appropriate time to do it. Additionally, we have talked for as long as Rick and I have been doing this series, which is going on a couple of years, I guess.
3 years.
Going on 3 years. Time flies.
When you're having fun.
Right. But the period 2008 to 2015 is this dramatic time from an astrological perspective of profound cultural change. And what triggered the whole process back in the fall of 2008 with the election of Obama and the economic meltdown was the first opposition between orderly, structured, institutional Saturn and chaotic Uranus. Well, those two opposing forces have completed their last opposition. We are, to a certain extent, even though we have 5 more years in time, we are sort of through the first phase of the major planetary transition that began in the fall of 2008. And while we may not have answers, while Kevin Costner did not clean up the Gulf, in spite of my great desires that he would be a heroic waterman and do that, in spite of that, Saturn and Uranus have moved on from their opposition, and this month we get our third and last conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus.
No, we get our second.
Our second?
Yeah, the
Sorry.
third one is in January.
That's right.
The first one was
Second
back in
one.
June.
Sorry. So Saturn and Uranus represented the breakdown of culture in some ways, subtle ways. We're basically able to keep it together for the most part. But Jupiter, the planet of growth and expansion, has joined Uranus, the planet of revolution, brilliance, and breakthrough once, and is coming back again this month on the 18th. And the conjunction of Jupiter, representing the higher mind of wisdom, and Uranus, representing the transpersonal mind of illumination, represents this month the possibility of getting answers. Whether we're able to translate them into words or not, there's still a special opportunity to get it. What that it is may not be easily explained, but there is the potential here of seeing something beyond the survival of the old culture to get glimpses of what's coming next.
Okay, so here's the question. Has this month, for most of us, been just like a notch crazier or more stressful or more stuff going on?
We don't have enough data yet. It's the first.
Okay, last month.
All right.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay.
Damn. That's usually my job, to be like the geeky
Timekeeper,
literalist, but
yeah.
no. The previous month, and of course even now, but it's like what Jeff was talking about, the Saturn opposite Uranus with Jupiter right there, and of course these are all squaring Pluto, which is not exact right now, but it's this pattern that has been stressed through this month and will be continued to be stressed over the months ahead. And what's interesting, though, is this optimistic Jupiter adjoining or conjoining electric and sudden Uranus, which, as you said, the first one happened back in June, and the second one happens mid this month, and then the third one happens in January of 2011. What's interesting here is something that I think makes it's something to note, and that is that the first time Jupiter and Uranus aligned in June, they had both just moved into the sign of Aries. This is the first sign of the zodiac, and it's the push ahead. Now, Uranus has backed up into Pisces. Jupiter backs up into Pisces over the next few days on September 8th, and the second of the 3 alignments happens in the previous sign of Pisces. They then both turn direct. Jupiter catches back up with Uranus, but still in Pisces before they both get back into Aries next year. And so in a way, it's almost like we're moving forward backwards here, because we've already gotten the blast of the future back last June when they were both as far ahead as they're going to get for a while. And although we're getting another shot at this overload, or Jeff called it a download, a program upgrade, if you will, we're getting new software. And we don't have to go out and purchase it. We don't have to give anyone our credit card. We're on the planet. Bzz, we're all getting it somehow. And so what's interesting, though, is that this next one in September and then the third alignment of Jupiter and Uranus next January, I think are going to be more intuitive. They may be subtler, although they're definitely there. And I think it's important for us to not feel like we're being dragged back into what's been happening over the last 6 or 7 years when Uranus has been in Pisces. But it's not really a remedial course. We're still going ahead. But somehow we're just taking a little bit of a pause as we try to, I think you used the word assimilate, which is a good Jupiter word, as we're trying to assimilate all this new information.
Right. And Pisces is better at assimilating to a certain extent than Aries.
But Aries doesn't have time for it.
Aries doesn't have time, and Aries wants to put things into action immediately. Whereas Pisces, the last sign of the zodiac, is the old ink blotter. It is the sign that is the most capable of absorbing a diversity of ideas and concepts. And what I want to share with you about this is that Jupiter is the planet of meaning. Mercury is the planet of information. Watch. Mercury would identify this as a watch and a black watch at that. What Jupiter would tend to do is try to put that watch in the context of what time means and timekeeping means in human experience. It expands the field. Uranus is the planet of freedom or liberation. So what this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction has a great deal to do with is understanding for ourselves what the meaning of freedom is. Because we don't necessarily know what freedom is. Lots of us, most of us, function habitually. What feels free is to have no obstacles in the way of pursuing our familiar pursuits. It's not about being free to discover, it's about being free to continue that with which we are already comfortable. For some, that is what true freedom is about, to maintain the course that you're on. For some, freedom is a radical shift of direction. And I think whether we get it consciously, or as Rick suggested, because this conjunction is occurring in Pisces, where it may operate on a more subtle, intuitive, or feeling level rather than a rational one, it is about a greater understanding of what freedom is for us. And it's very interesting because for one person, freedom might be keeping a steady, boring job. That might be a growthful experience for their soul that will liberate their hearts, their minds, and their creative principles. Freedom does not mean we all have to fly our freak flags. We all have to sort of operate outside the cultural norm. It's going to be different for each one of us. So keep your mind open, your eyes open for those little flashes of things that make you feel alive in a way that is freeing. And that will give you some clues as to the form and shape of the freedom you get to create over the rest of this transit through next January.
I thought freedom was just another word for nothing left to lose.
That too. That too.
I actually tried not to say that, just for the record, but programming was on automatic.
Well, I have to be nice. Because we have a Venus-Mars, I just want to mention before I forget. Nope. Venus, the planet of love, and Mars, the planet of action. Astrology's lovers, the planets that sandwich us here on Earth. Mars, the first one outside the Earth's orbit, like some male going to inseminate the cosmos, and Venus, the planet between us and the sun, luring us back to the central home representing beauty and love. These are astrology's lovers, and they have been tracking pretty closely for much of the past month in Libra, which is Venus's sign. Mars, the warrior, is not that comfortable in Libra because the warrior doesn't get to fight, doesn't get to punch people in the nose. He's got to put on his diplomatic wear and be kind and wear white gloves and shake hands with people who he wants to kill.
Actually, Jeff, you're being really kind about Mars because when we talked about this doing something a few days ago, you were basically talking about him in Libra being emasculated and in drag.
Yeah, that too.
So you've toned down your story. It was like he was a pussy whip Mars a couple of days ago.
A couple of days ago. Yeah.
Now
Mars,
he's comfortable in his ballet shoes.
Well, but the thing I wanted to bring up about this is that we've had, during these transits, we've had a couple of peace issues. One is the removal of U.S. combat forces from Iraq. But as is often the case with Libra, what you see is not what you get. In other words, we're not dismantling the enormous private and government-run U.S. footprint in Iraq, but we have made something that looks like it's moving towards peace. And now in the Middle East, the head of the PLO and Israel are getting together and talking, supposedly. But again, while I hope in all cases that peace does break out, the fact is that we're in a very good PR environment for peace.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just wanted to bring up one more thing about this. I had a client yesterday, I think. She's a sun, moon, fire, and she has Mercury, Venus, Mars in Virgo and in Cancer. So what that means is the sun and moon, which are the basic dominant forces, are fiery. They're willful. They're expressive. They're creative. But Mercury, Venus, and Mars have a great deal to do with the supernumeraries we need to deliver who we are to the world. So this is a woman who's got big fiery energy, but her delivery system is all sort of careful and worried and wimpy. Don't be fooled by the appearance of behavior which belies the essence of what's going on. And the point is here that Venus, Mars, and Libra are wonderful for political and other forms of seduction. They look really good as long as you keep your clothes on. Once we get down to the details beyond the appearance, then life becomes more complex. And we're going to be meeting that soon.
Well, and in fact, everything that you said is true for the reason that you said it. However, it's also even more true for another thing that plays into this. And that is that, yes, we have Venus in her home sign and Mars a little bit mellowed in diplomatic Libra, but both of these planets, as they move forward over the next week, will both make harmonious trine aspects with Neptune, which reinforces this whole shell game of what we're seeing, the diplomatic grace and panache, is that the right word?
It's a good word, yeah.
This sense of yes, the war is really over. This is Venus and Mars trining Neptune. This is the shapeshifter. This is not the WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, it's WYSIWYG. It's what you see is not what you get. And so even though you were saying it, there's another whole astrological reason behind it that makes this even more so. We're all in a state of just being in awe of the magic of how wonderful all this is playing out, or at least many people are. And the fact is that it's not that way at all. I mean, and I think that you were very gracious in the way that you said it, and I'll probably just leave it at that, but I don't think I would be quite as gracious in the scam of what looks like the end of a war.
Right.
It's just not.
It's just the next phase, how the combat goes from open military to now it's economic, diplomatic. There's still the struggles that were existing before, but in another form. Now,
and we're still funding the army that's fighting the same war we were. We just put them in different uniforms, privatized them, and made them look like locals.
Right. Well,
like I said, don't get me started.
There's a shift here. The 8th of September. Two important things happen on the 8th of September. It's the new moon, which represents a new lunar cycle every month, seeding a new period of experience. But Venus, about whom we've been speaking, shifts into Scorpio, which is Mars territory. The sort of...
Could you say why Scorpio is Mars?
Because Mars was the traditional key ruling planet of Scorpio. Venus, who is considered to be strong in Libra. In other words, when a planet's in a sign that it rules or has a positive affinity for, its qualities are reinforced. When it moves into a sign that has opposite characteristics, which is the case of Venus going into Scorpio, then she theoretically loses some of her power. The social grace, the politeness, the appearance of peace and harmony gives way or starts to shift toward the narrow green eyes of envy and desire, which are more aware of what's missing and what we're hungry for, which is what Scorpio is about. You know, Libra's the kind of person, they could be starving, you know, and you drop some food by accident in front of them, and they might politely ask you if they could possibly have a bite before they die, you know, where the Scorpio is going to be drilling a hole into your bag of food to get the food out of it, because desire dominates appearance. And as Venus goes into Scorpio, we are likely to encounter a bit more those aspects of desire that don't necessarily fit our idealized public profile.
So we actually have three things happening right around that time. We have a new moon.
Right.
We have Mercury that is getting ready to turn direct. It's not turned direct quite yet. It turns direct on the 12th, I think.
Right.
And then we have, just following up behind that on the 14th, let me go back here so we can move this along. We have Mars behind Venus coming into Scorpio.
Which is Mars's favorite position vis-a-vis Venus, by the way.
Because Mars, you see, what happened is that while Mars and Venus were in Libra, they were in Venus's ruling sign. As Mars and Venus move both into Scorpio, they're now in Mars's domain, because in modern astrology, Pluto is the planet that relates to Scorpio, but in ancient or traditional astrology, Mars was also Aries and Scorpio's planet. And so with Mars on the 14th moving into Scorpio, now we have Mars in his old domain along with Venus, and it really does change the game a bit, I think.
Yeah, and the good part of it is that maybe we can get some things done. Because Libra is a cardinal sign that begins seasons. It opens the proposition. The fixed signs that occupy the middle of the seasons consolidate and commit, or just move on to the next thing. So Mars in Scorpio represents a greater capacity to dig in and get things done. If Mars has been made less potent in Libra, he will regain his potency in Scorpio and have Venus along in Scorpio to be his consort to pull out what it is we need to pull out. But I just wanted to back up for a second.
Absolutely.
I mentioned the new moon.
We're back there.
The new moon on the 8th of September, all new moons are the union of the sun and the moon. They're a conception point. Conception takes place in the dark, and we're usually unaware that it occurred. That's what happens at a new moon. You don't see the moon. What do you mean? The moon was impregnated by the sun, but we can't see the moon. So what new moons represent is sort of an unconscious beginning. That the sun and the moon, which are the basic dynamic of left and right, or yin and yang, when they're fused together, we can't tell the difference between the two.
In fact, in ancient cultures, the new moon was actually defined as the first sighting of the moon, which was usually 2 days after the new moon, because you can't see it.
Right. But we can calculate it, or others have calculated, and we benefited by their work. And the new moon in Virgo is a time to plant the seed for something Virgo, something practical, something analytical, something that develops skills. And one of my favorite memes or lines about Virgo is it's a sign of the perfectionist, which is death. Because being a perfectionist means that you're bound to fail and fail and fail and fail, which can be pretty disempowering. Yet perfecting the process of improvement is something that's doable for all of us, which is, I think, a much more realistic and valuable way to look at this new moon in Virgo. So instead of expecting yourself to perfect your opera singing or your flute playing or your belly dancing, whatever it is, if there's a commitment to improvement and you do the training, which is what Virgo wants, it's a no bullshit sign. It's an earth sign. You got to show up and you have to do it. There's a real opportunity here to engage. Mercury will have been direct for 3 days in Virgo and a new moon in Virgo. And we've got a new thrust of energy that's coming up in the middle of this month. But it's a thrust of energy that's not a rocket ship ride. it is a carefully calculated step in directions of improvement.
I have a friend who is a Virgo who used to say, perfection for a Virgo is almost good enough. You know, and it's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
There's no such thing.
Right.
And so therefore it becomes part of learning how to be a good Virgo is learning how to know when something is useful and good
Right.
enough.
Right.
I think there's another piece to this Virgo new moon because it's in Virgo. You know, Virgo is the sign of the harvest also. And so it's a transition point where that which, it's not, the new moon is not only the beginning of a new cycle, as all new moons are, but cycles keep going around. And so it's also the ending of the previous cycle. And so this new moon in particular, because Mercury has been direct now, it'll go direct a few days after the new moon, and because we're planting the seed, it also means that we have to harvest what it is that's ready for harvest. We can't just go planting the seed for what's next and going off. We have to take care of the old business so that, in fact, we finish up what we need to so that we can harvest and put up the food that we've harvested before we're just running off to what's next.
Good point. Good point. A counter picture is Jupiter retrograding back into Pisces. Jupiter was the ruler of Pisces in traditional astrology and is therefore considered strong. It's sort of the return of the prophet with a PH, not an FIT, sorry. But the return of the prophet is Jupiter going back to the prophetic sign of Pisces, the sign of faith, the sign of knowing beyond the boundaries and limits of words. So this does offer during the, I don't know when Jupiter will go back into Aries. I guess it's early next year.
Yeah. February.
So,
January, February.
So we've got a window here of about 4 months of the planet of wisdom being in its spiritual home sign, which represents a greater access, again, to a kind of knowing, to a kind of meaning which is beyond explanation. So we've got this interesting contrast of planets in Virgo, planets in Scorpio, both of which are tight, focused, and getting things done here, but sort of the wisdom being in a much more diffuse form. What it means is you don't have to know exactly what you're doing in the larger sense. If it basically sort of seems right and you're getting your work done, it's more likely that when Jupiter turns around and goes direct, that you'll really get what it is your efforts are all about.
Then as we follow the month onward and we watch the moon moving through its signs, as the moon grows fuller and fuller, it comes close to opposite the sun, and right before it does, actually right around the time that it does, the sun goes into Libra on the 22nd, and then the full moon is on the 23rd. And so what happens is that when the sun moves into Libra, you've heard this from us before because we had Aries and Uranus in cardinal sign. We had Jupiter and Uranus in cardinal sign Aries. We have Pluto in cardinal sign Capricorn. We have Saturn in cardinal sign Libra. The cardinal signs are about the change of seasons. And when the sun moves into cardinal sign Libra, we get a change of season. This is the halfway point in the astrological year that begins with the sun in Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, and the fulcrum point or the balance beam, Libra being the sign of the scales or balance, when the sun moves into Libra on the 22nd. This is very key because as the sun moves into Libra, right around that time in the few days before, it's going to oppose Jupiter and Uranus, move into Libra, square Pluto, conjunct Saturn, and at the same time the full moon or the nearly full moon comes sweeping through there and will also conjunct Jupiter, conjunct Uranus, square Pluto, oppose the sun, and oppose Saturn, and oh my God.
Well,
hold on.
Yeah, that's a big one. it's funny, Rick and I will be in Bali then, and there's a full moon ceremony. And I said to Rick, it's the full moon and the equinox. And he said, they don't care about the equinox. They're virtually on the equator. It's always the equinox
It's
there.
12 hours of sun and 12 hours
pretty
of
much all
dark
year
every
round.
Year, all
but
year.
for us, as we've been pointing out for some time, every time planets move into cardinal or season starting signs, they will trigger Jupiter and Uranus when they were in Aries, Saturn in Libra, and Pluto in Capricorn. And basic astrological timing ABC is the faster moving cycles trigger off the likelihood of events or experiences that are set up by the slower moving ones. And this is one hell of a full moon. It is one of extraordinary cardinality, which is the turning of the wheel. It's the hinge upon which the year of seasons turn. So this is an extraordinary period of time that may manifest itself certainly in the broader public scheme as dramatic events, some of which may not be very pretty. Certainly a changing of the guard.
Some of which we've already seen.
Yeah, well, you know, it's a big world with lots of news outlets, so there's crap every day. I mean, you could find what's the best day of the year? How many people were not murdered that day? I mean, there's crap all the time, just simply based on who we are as humans and the numbers of us. But on days like this, while it suggests the real possibility of making a step toward a cultural shift as leaders of organizations change, it also represents for us the extraordinary beginning of not just a new season in the year, but perhaps a new season in our lives.
Yeah, no, this is an important one, and again, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. This ties back to what we were doing globally, culturally, politically, and personally as far back as the summer of 2008, fall of 2008. It also ties through what happened back earlier this summer when Jupiter and Uranus first joined in Aries. It also ties back to what was going on both culturally, politically, socially, and individually when this T-square was activated over this last month as the moon moved into Cancer back at the beginning of summer and through July and August. And so it was also activated then, but this is like the next step, and in some ways, this one becomes a you can't go back. Because now Saturn, which had peaked on into Libra, Saturn spends about 2 years in a sign. It moved into Virgo in 2009. It peaked into Libra, then it moved back into Virgo, and now it's in Libra, and it doesn't go back into Virgo for another 30 years or 28 years.
2008 it went into Virgo.
2008, so thank you. And so what happens now is that Saturn is in Libra, cardinal sign in this mix. As the sun, Jeff said that these slower moving rhythms are triggered by faster moving planets. Well, the sun and the moon are the two fastest, or actually can be, but the moon is certainly the fastest. And when you have the sun-moon opposition or conjunction, the new moon or the full moon or the new moon, activating a series of 1, 2, 3, 4 other planets, Jupiter, Uranus, Saturn, and Pluto, being activated by both the sun and the moon, that is one heck of a trigger. And yeah, there's no looking back.
Okay, that's a very good way to put it. And you know, another way to look at it is the moon in Aries. It's a full moon, a basic contradiction between feelings of the moon and purpose of the sun. The feelings of the moon in Aries is I want to be independent. The conscious will, right now, yesterday. The conscious will of the sun in Libra is I want partners, I want to cooperate. But here's one way we could tie them together. And it is about being new, that's the moon in Aries, apart from the cardinality, with a purpose. Pluto in Capricorn, sun in Libra, and with partners. What this suggests is, while we may step ahead of the pack as individuals, we are bound up with one another. And so that the awareness of taking steps forward in your life that are purposeful does impact and will engage other people. And that, I think, does a fairly good job of making some sense out of what can look like a crisis, but a crisis that could well be for us a breakthrough.
And as much as this may be the supernova day, of the season, because it will shine so brightly, as the full moon begins to wane, let me get this back to moving a day at a time. As the full moon begins to wane, you'll notice that the sun begins to creep up on Saturn, and it will, on the 25th, exactly square Pluto.
Right.
And then by the end of the month, on the 30th, it will actually catch up with and overtake Saturn. And what's interesting is on this last day of the month, on the 31st, we also have the moon moving from Gemini into Cancer, which once again completes this grand square and again stimulates the whole thing. But now we have, instead of the full moon in the picture, we have the sun aligning with Saturn, squaring with Pluto, and the moon filling in that missing point.
Yeah, I was thinking that Sun Square Pluto day is a big day. As Rick pointed out, that as we go past that full moon, we're going to find out what this costs. You want to do something new? What do you pay? Pluto is the troll who you meet as you want to cross the bridge, who you have to pay. So what are you going to have to give up? What are you going to have to pay? That's the Sun, Pluto. And then Saturn, if you're lucky, will give you a receipt if you have paid the proper price.
And if you haven't?
If not, it's back to the woods, and we'll see you next time around.
Yeah, there's, one of my favorite astrologers who wrote in the 1940s and 50s, a man named Grant Lewy, L-E-W-I. Grant Lewy said that when the sun joins Saturn, it's the time when the chickens of ambition come home to roost. This guy was an English professor before he quit his job and became an astrologer. And then he goes on to say, however, that if you've been tending your chickens, they come home fat and happy, laying golden eggs. But if you haven't, they come home scrawny and in need of food and care. And you don't have the resources to take care of them, but you know what? They're yours. And you got it anyhow. And so what happens when the sun joins Saturn, it's often karmic in as much as we get what we deserve. We find halfway across the bridge whether or not the troll is going to say, it's you, go,
right,
or not on your life, sucker. You've been bad-mouthing me, and now it's my turn to get even. And it's not an all or nothing thing usually. Typically, there are areas of our life that work out fine, and there are other areas of our life that kind of where we have problems. Right. And yet, this is certainly one of those, come to Jesus.
Yeah, we're crossing a threshold.
Crossing a threshold.
Big threshold. Before we take our break, I want to just do a plug for our book. Rick and I write a forecast book called Your Astrology Guide. This is the 2011 book. It's on sale here at SoulFood. If you buy one here, Rick and I will be happy to autograph it for you. For those
with
out
anyone's
there,
name you want us to sign.
Right. For William Shakespeare, whoever you like, we'll sign him as. But for those of you who are not with us here at SoulFood, you can get this at bn.com, at Amazon, and at your local favorite bookstore.
And another word about these books is that although they're presented as sun sign books and they're intelligible if you have no astrological knowledge or little astrological knowledge, the fact is that they're really using, like we do here, they're using real transits and the real motion of the planets in a way that's descriptive, that if you're interested in learning more and learning how these planets actually do affect you on a regular basis, it's a book that can help you throughout the year begin to, get a better sense of what the rhythms actually mean in your lives individually.
Great.
So now we're going to take about a 10-minute break. If you would like us to consider using your chart as an example, we'll do 3 charts when we come back from break. We'll put them up on the board here, up on the screen, and we'll use these as teaching examples to show how what it is that we've been talking about actually comes down to earth, where the rubber meets the road in our individual lives. If you want your chart to be considered, we'll pull them out of a hat or a coffee cup or the air or some, never mind. Put your first name, your birth date, and your time of day on a slip of paper. We don't need a full chart or an 8.5 by 11-inch piece of paper. Birth time, date, and place. And if it's missing that information, you won't be included your name, your birth date, your birth time, and your birthplace, and we'll pick 3. And
yeah, and this does not go up on our YouTube video. So we stop here. Sarah from SoulFood generously has donated their last copy of the 2010 book. And if anyone would like
there are a few months left, I understand.
If anyone would like it, drop a piece of paper up here and put the word book on it, and we'll pick someone who will get a copy of this.
Put your name on it too, though. That would be helpful.
That would help, yes.
And so we're going to take a few minute break. This is your chance to patronize SoulFood as a way of saying thanks for hosting us and for these kinds of events. And also Van and who else is behind the counter there?
Lily.
Lily are happy to serve you caffeine so you can't sleep when you go home. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Get up in the morning slaving for bread, sir, so that every mouth can be fed. Oh, me Israelites, get up in the morning slaving for bread, sir, so that every mouth can be fed. Oh, me Israelite. My wife and my kids, they pack up and leave me. Darling, she said I was yours to receive. Oh, me Israelite. Shut them a tear up choices ago. I don't want to end up like Bonnie and Clyde. Oh, me Israelite. After a storm, there must be a calm. If you catch me in a farm, you sound your alarm. Oh, me Israelite. I get up in the morning, slaving for bread, sir, so that every mouth can be fed. For the Israelites, sir. I said my wife and my kids, they pack up and leave me. Darling, she said I was yours to receive. For me Israelites, sir. Look, me chuck them a tear of choices ago. I don't want to end up like Bonnie and Clyde. Or me Israelites. After a storm, there must be a calm. If you catch me in the farm, you sound your alarm. Oh, me Israelite. Yeah. I'm wondering, I'm working so hard. For me, Israelite, look down on me, sir. For me, Israelite,
son, give me your number now. He said, what's your number? I don't answer. He said, what's your number, man? I don't answer. He said, what's your number now? He said, what's your number now? I said, hey, 54, 46, that's my number. Oh, 54, 46, that's my number. One more time. 54, 46, that's my number. Oh, 54, 46, that's my number. I say yeah, it's the one they say, I say yeah, me now. It's the one they say, da 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 dee 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 da da dee da 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 dee 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 da 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 dee Shake it up, mister. Hear what I say, sir. Get your hands in the hair, sir. You will get no hurt, sir. He say, turn out your left pocket. Full time, right time, nice time. Don't watch that one, that's this one. Don't watch that one, that's this one. Oh, how you feel, man? Nice. You know I'm gonna spin this, man. Oh, the man who loves to spin them when they're real crisp. That's your hound dog, CB. Whoa. Well, and you know what again, man? Sound screen. The man that put all the glint in your knees. That's your whole body. Soul shot, JD. Well, nice. Nice, right time. Don't watch that one. That's this one. Don't watch that one.
Every night me go to sleep, me have wet dream. Every night me go to sleep, me have wet dream. Lie down, girl, make me push it up, lie down. Lie down, girl, make me push it up, lie down. your small corner, I stand in mine. Throw all the punch you want to, I can take them all. Lie down, gal, let me push it up, lie down. Lie down, gal, let me push it up, lie down. How you big and fat, like a big shot. Give the trumpet to Bigfoot Joe, give the funny to me. Lie down, gal, let me push it up, lie down. Huh. Lie down, gal, let me push it up, lie down. Lie down, gal, let me push it up, lie down. Lie down, gal, let me push it up, lie down. Lie down, gal, let me push it up, lie down. So me say, lie down, gal, let me push it up, lie down. Huh. Lie down, gal, let me push it up, lie down. In there. Cause it gives me sweet inspiration. And to tell you I never felt this way before. I know there is some way today. Love your brothers, my friend. Love your sisters. Love your brothers. Ooh, yeah. Love your sisters. And to tell you, I must admit, you've got me thinking. You've got me thinking. There were times I thought that I was sinking. But I'll always want to be in that position where I can see more clearly, where I can see more clearly. I must admit that you got me thinking. You got me thinking. There were times I thought that I was sinking. I was sinking. But I'll always want to be in that position where I can see more clearly. Yeah, clearly. Love your brothers, my friend. Love your sisters. Love your brothers and your sisters. Ooh, yeah, yeah.
Ready or not, here we come.
Ready or not, there I came.
Ready or not, whoops. Oh, wait. Shh. I didn't say that. You didn't hear that.
No. I thought the public wasn't supposed to get this close to us. It's part of our contract. You look like a
I said something inappropriate, but the mic wasn't on.
Kidding.
I lucked out. You missed the joke. No.
So we've got 3 charts to look at, and as Rick mentioned, these are demos. They're not meant to be sensitive, soul-touching, meaningful. These are...
Or accurate. As
or
long as we're
accurate. They're examples of what individual charts look like.
So, Sean?
Shauna.
Shauna.
Shauna, you're the big
You're missing
winner.
an A.
You get the book, too. Shauna won the book.
So Shauna is apparently having a Jupiter-Venus transit because not only did she win a reading, but she also won the book, 2 drawings.
Well, it could have been that. It could have been that $20 bill she included with it.
Maybe you should. So what is it here that we got going?
An exact
full moon.
Full moon. There's the sun at 21 degrees and 9 minutes of Leo, directly opposite the moon at 21 degrees and 6 minutes of Virgo, meaning that you were born within minutes of the full moon, just prior to it.
And the full moon in Aquarius is a weird one. Well, because the moon is about our connection and our feelings. And Aquarius is about intellectual, logic, conceptual, that only occurs when you get some distance. You can't be logical if you're emotionally involved, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And so here we have the sun in heart-centered, Leo, with the moon in kind of this logical, detached place, and yet the two are intimately one and the same here because they're like opposite sides of the same coin.
That's right. Every duality, one could say there are 6 signs of the zodiac with 2 forms of expression. So oppositions like your full moon do that. But it's interesting, the word emotion. Generally, when astrologers use the word emotion, we think of water signs, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. For us, generally, we think of the receptive side of feeling. Leo is emotional in the emoting side. Fire signs can express it. It doesn't mean that they are taking it in. So even though there is a dramatic, expressive side potentially with that Leo moon, Leo sun, it's different. It doesn't have the same degree of receptivity as would be a Pisces moon or a Cancer moon or a Scorpio moon.
Okay, Shauna, let's talk about weird. Well, okay, I mean, we have Aquarius rising, Jupiter and the moon in Aquarius, and we have the moon very closely trine that's harmonized with Uranus, which is the eccentric, weirdo, Aquarian, eclectic, futuristic, other than normal, shocking, and not always stable planet. So does that make any sense to you? It does, yeah. All right. We probably don't want to know anymore.
Well, there's another Leo-Aquarius opposition, and that's Mercury opposite Jupiter. And it's interesting, just as the sun and moon represent a polarity, the basic day-night, yang-yin energy, Mercury and Jupiter are pairs of opposites.
Which you talked about earlier this evening.
Right,
actually.
the data aspect of mind, Mercury, and the philosophical or meaning aspect of mind, Jupiter, they're opposite too. And with oppositions, the stakes in the game do go up. Because what you're dealing with is extreme ends of a spectrum of behavior, which puts us on an edge of madness or genius, and often bits of both. But it's interesting, most of us, I'm a fan of emotion, usually, but Shauna has Saturn, the planet of limit or constraint, in Cancer, a water sign, a feeling sign, joined with her moon south node in Cancer, which is really, it's like being very aware of what feelings are about, but having the need to suppress them or to control them. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for you, Shauna.
Well, it's interesting because that Saturn is also very closely square Pluto.
Oh my
I mean,
gosh.
one of the things that I notice about your chart, Shauna, is how much interaction there is between the planets.
She's very interactive.
Whenever
She was
you have,
chatting us up before.
whenever you have a chart with the planets spread around, it gives them more of an opportunity to interact with more of each other. And yet, they're not always exactly mathematically tied. And here we have an example where these planets are tied by sextiles, by trines, and by squares, and by oppositions, and the thickness of the lines denotes that they're close. And so there's a lot going on here, for better and for worse, both. There's the sense of you have the stress and the tension and the going on one hand, and yet there's also the ease of movement and the interaction and the way to resolve it on the other. And so it's a mixed blessing, but it's better than not having anything going on.
Sort of the odd planet out is Venus in Virgo. That Venus, because Shauna has lots of aspects, Mars in Taurus is at right angles or squares to Mercury and Jupiter, and Rick talked accurately about how much wiring there are. The aspects are the significant geometric patterns or angles, and there's a heck of a lot of them going on here. But that Venus in Virgo doesn't make close aspects and is characterologically different than the bold Leo sun, the conceptually far out Aquarius planets. This sort of Venus in Virgo sort of says, you know, you can be as far out as you want, but you're going to be appreciated for following the rules, being a good maid, and cleaning up other people's messes. Her Venus is in the 8th house of shared resources or other people's stuff. Virgo is clean, so it's kind of interesting. Integrating that part is, I think, challenging because you're a much bolder person than the vehicle of love and approval, which is Venus suggests.
One of my favorite longtime historical figures, astrologers, was a guy named Marsilio Ficino, who was the court astrologer to the Medicis during the Florentine Renaissance in the late 15th century. And he would look at your chart and say, you would benefit from practicing rituals that brought Venus into your life, rather than aspiring toward luring her in. Because what Jeff said was very true and very accurate about Venus being kind of like it's the only planet that's not on the committee.
Right.
You know, Venus is sitting off in the other room, and she may be fine by herself, but she doesn't get to interact with everyone else. And I think because it's in Virgo, which can be a quiet or timid sign, that she worries about not being present or how to make herself present, how to be liked, how to be pretty, how to be loved, how to appreciate. And so it's not about going out and looking for Venus out there. It's about gardening and keeping flowers on, in your house. It's about having art. It's about going out of your way to listen to music or take the oily bath with candles, even if you're going, what the hell? This isn't my personality. Someone else would do this. I don't. But there's that whole thing about creating the space for the planet to come in. And that was kind of like my hit here about your Venus in Virgo.
Yeah, I think that's a good analysis also because Virgo is Earth. So it's through the material world, it's through concrete and material things that Venus is made manifest. And your North Node, your point of growth or integration, is also in Earth, Capricorn. So be a magician, be a witch, be someone who sets out an intention, not some Aquarian like, oh, I'll get what I get. We'll all be brothers and sisters here. Let's all be friendly. No, this really is. I think Rick really put his finger on something here that can be extremely useful.
However, but, and.
Nevertheless, still, though, we write. So
Yeah.
we do this all the time.
Okay, yet.
Yet.
I love conjunctions. Okay, and I don't mean planetary conjunctions.
Right.
Okay, all of those things. The thing here that stands out right now is not your Venus. It's the fact that your Saturn at 0 or 1 degree of cardinal and your Pluto at 2 to 3 degrees of cardinal. Cardinal signs are the beginning signs of each season. And if you remember earlier, we were talking about this Uranus-Jupiter conjunction, opposed Saturn and square Pluto, all in cardinal signs. Well, hello. So what this would mean to me as I look at your chart is I wonder how this incredible change that you're on the threshold of, that is that is in process now, because Saturn is already past the point. Saturn's at about 4 degrees, and it's not coming back. And so that there's been some real critical decisions, perhaps, that you've made in the past 6-8 months, and maybe even in the past 6-8 weeks. And yet, because there's the yet, and yet, both two at once, and yet the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, which is opposite here in late Pisces, early Aries, and square, that doesn't play through till next January, February, that this is an extraordinary time, and that if you've done the hard work that Saturn has demanded, now you're going to get the rewards that Jupiter and Uranus will bring into the equation early next year, and perhaps you have a sense of what some of that may be, or what you might want it to be. Does this make sense to you a little bit?
Just be purposeful about it. Even if what you wind up with isn't what you're aiming at, I think it's important to have a very specific aim. Intention is important when you're dealing with Saturn, Pluto, and a North Node in Capricorn. Thank you, Shauna.
Thank you.
And you can pay us for the book afterward if you like.
Okay, all right.
Okay. Oh, it's free? Yeah. Next. Madhu.
Madur. Madur?
Here she is. Hi.
Is that Madur? Madhu.
Madhu. He
I
added an R.
I put the R on there.
Yeah. Unnecessarily.
This is the arbitrary R.
So it's so interesting to look at several charts because you get to see the difference of the patterns. And actually a good way to learn astrology is to just look at charts sometimes without even analyzing them. It's allowing your mind to be impressed by a variety of pictures, almost as if you are training your eye to sort of have familiarity with a variety of patterns, again, without the pressure of interpreting.
What's the difference between these two charts? No, I mean just from the standpoint of the patterns in the middle.
Wow, that's fascinating. What do we see? Jupiter rising in both cases.
Oh yeah, Jupiter rising. But look at the difference in the colors that show up.
All right.
You know, the colors, the blues represent aspects of ease or of flowing energy, and the reds are energy that is more tense or blocked. Not that one is better or worse than the other. They both have their purposes and their disadvantages. But when we look at Madhu's chart, we see a whole different flavor. It's less noisy, and the predominant color becomes this green that's being aimed here at Saturn in Capricorn rising, with Jupiter and Saturn both in Capricorn rising. It's much more contained.
Yes,
But
except. Well, and here's another difference, is Shauna's a full moon and Madhu is a new moon person. But Shauna's full moon is in fixed signs, season-centered signs, which tend to be more resistant. Madhu's new moon is in the super flexible sign of Gemini. So you don't need a lot of Gemini to have a lot of noise. It's just a different kind.
But she hides her noise well, I would imagine.
There's a lot of processing going on here. Yeah, let me talk about that Saturn briefly that Rick pointed out, connected by the green lines. This is what's called a yod, or a finger of God. When you have two planets that are about 60 degrees apart, such as Uranus with the moon and Mercury, that's a harmonious sextile, suggesting a kind of quickness and alertness. Uranus is high frequency, Mercury's high frequency, Gemini's high frequency, very alert to what's going on out there. This is on the right side of the chart, the western side. So there's this acute alertness to others out there, yet anchoring it is the point, the finger of God in the part of the chart that has to do with self, which is Saturn in Capricorn. God, you're responsible for all of our crap. Thank you, Madhu. I appreciate the hard work that you're doing to try to figure out who we are, sacrificing yourself for our good. But what it can do in a positive sense is to suggest that you can be an authoritative anchor or reliable person in the midst of a multifaceted, rapidly moving, diverse environment. Or, however, nevertheless,
still.
De toute façon.
Huh? I need a
Okay.
trick. Huh?
I don't know what you mean.
All right, there's another important
What do you
piece
say?
here, too,
What does it- Yeah.
that
Oh,
emphasizes. Madhu, you have a very interesting contrast, and few signs are as self-contrasting as Gemini. As Walt Whitman said, and I quote him a couple of times a year here, he was a Gemini. He said, "Contradict myself, I contain multitudes." He took the negative of diversity and made it into a positive. And what's contrasting here is Madhu has Jupiter rising, joyous, happy, outgoing Jupiter, but it's in Capricorn, a serious sign, and backed up by Saturn in Capricorn. So there's this sort of, you're a good cheerleader, in a way, or you're a good person, I think, for bringing some of the optimism of Jupiter into what could be a hard situation. It's not rah-rah the football game, who cares? It's the real-life game of Capricorn, of business, of making it in the world. And you got?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is that although Jupiter is rising, as Jeff said, in Capricorn, which does show the optimistic side, it shows it in a very contained and serious manner. There's a lot more going on than the easy breezy Gemini stuff here, contained by the serious responsibilities that you've been given in life of Saturn, because we have the Sun in a very close square with Pluto, which indicates that there's stuff that we don't talk about. Not that we're asking you to talk about it, but there's stuff either from early childhood or family stuff that has to do with power, with control, with difficult stuff that gives you a very strong inner resolve, whether or not it comes out in the way that you feel it on the inside. It's part of what you carry around. It's almost like this, yes, I can be easy and seem optimistic and easygoing, and yeah, I'll take care of what I need to, but don't screw with me. Because if you do, the deal's off and my patience is over, and you ain't going to last. I don't care who you are. Now, does this make sense to you a little bit?
Yeah, like a good friend with a bad enemy.
A good friend
a good
and a
friend
bad
and a
enemy.
bad enemy.
Right.
Yeah, I would much rather have you as a friend than an enemy. I mean, I would much rather have anyone as a friend than an enemy. But in this
I
case,
don't know.
well, all right. But in this case, that becomes even more so. The other thing that I just want to mention is the fact that Mars is in Aries. And so behind all of this, even though it's not integrated real easily with a lot of your chart, that you're basically a bit punchy. There's this feisty, fiery kind of energy that even with how much you contain, how much you hold in, there's still a part of you that will get angry and then it'll be done.
Good. Yeah, another big contrast here is the Capricorn rising with Jupiter and especially Saturn is sort of in the exterior. It's the older child, firstborn kind of energy, but the core of your being is much more youthful. You're a sun, moon, new moon Gemini. You can't be younger and sort of more youthful than that. So this can often be indicative of someone who feels youthful regardless of how much responsibility she has put on her. No matter what you take on, there's still somebody. People don't know you. I'm telling you, I would say from this chart, you're a hard person to read because you've got that sort of Gemini curiosity and diversity and that Uranian element, but behind the responsible Capricornian wall.
One last thing here about timing,
Yeah.
and that is that this T-square is certainly hitting off on your Jupiter and your ascendant. Pluto has gone over your ascendant. Lots of personal change or feelings that you want to transform, almost like a molting of a snake shedding its skin, or a metamorphosis, changing into something else. While Saturn is reaching the top of your chart, which in some ways you may want to look back to the mid-late 90s when Saturn was at the bottom of your chart in Aries, 96, 97, somewhere in there, and look at what in your life you started in the mid-late 90s that now is coming to fruition with the Saturn on the top of your chart over the next year or so. Because in some ways, your life has reached a point where you've been going down a path and you've reached the end of that path. That doesn't mean that everything in your life will change or that your life is over. What it means, though, is that some of the things that have been driving you to here, you're now here. And now you have to figure out what it is you want to do next and how you're going to consolidate what it is that you've gained as you move into the next phase of your life, which is still, a year or so down the road, but it's in process. You're in that process now. Does that make sense to you a little bit?
Yes. What does the yod do in a person's chart?
The word yod is actually from the Hebrew letter yod, which is the 10th letter of the alphabet. And a yod is actually, the reason why it's called the finger of God is that in Hebrew, the Torah, the Bible, the first 5 books of the Bible, were on scroll, and you weren't allowed to touch it when you read it because the oils of your hand would disintegrate, would ruin it.
Paper,
so they used a device that was often silver that was in the shape of a tiny hand with a pointer on it, and that's what a yod is. It's a pointer to read the holy word. And what the way it works is that the 2 planets at the what we call the base of the yod, the sextile that Jeff talked about, this ability to have innovative Uranus kind of quick thinking, quick mind, all of that, those energies work well together. And they feed and they power and they point this way. And so the yod, the way it works is that it often takes an energy that is easy to start with, but it's hard to express. And it's through the practice of learning how to contain, in your case, that noise and force that or push that energy out through your personality. It's about, I think, about your gaining authority in what it is that you do through your life and learning that you do have your own sense of centeredness or authority. So a yod is often a pattern that takes years to develop, and we often see it become more meaningful in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, as what was a bothersome agitation actually becomes something that we become rather specialized and good at.
Good. Thank you, Muddy. One more.
And then we get to go to Bali?
No. That's a good name.
All right, who's this? Illuminata. Is that like a birth name or a taken name? Not that it matters. I just, if it was a birth name, I wanted to meet your parents.
Yeah. I guess so. All right, very, very different looking chart. Yeah, some very interesting contrasts right off the get-go. Illuminata is a Capricorn with the moon in Gemini, and that is a strange and exotic cocktail because the sort of desires are so different. Capricorn is about clarity and a certain degree of authority and direction, commitment, whereas Gemini, of course, is about discovery. It's about throwing away the map and following the winds. So that's a very interesting dance in your chart.
Yeah, and that same dilemma is extended by the fact that the moon in Gemini is 90 degrees or square Capricorn's key or ruling planet Saturn. And it's not only the sun in Capricorn, but
Right.
Mercury and Venus are in Capricorn, and the Mercury and Venus get along well with Saturn. So there's a
Right.
sense that you really work well with containment, with authority, with rules, with learning what boundaries are, and then working within them and creating organization and structure within them. However, it's not what you need. The moon is what you need, and you need diversity. You need you have the curiosity that takes you to the edge and then wants to know what's on the other side of the edge, so to speak. And so it's interesting because there's a lot of, I think of Ram Dass once saying, "I've been should upon long enough."
Right.
And in a way, all the Capricorn stuff and the Saturn squaring the moon is, even though your parents, as you said, may have been hippies, there were a lot of rules, or there was a lot of expectations, or those expectations are internal expectations. And it's almost like it's hard to be good enough. It's hard to do the right thing because your mind doesn't necessarily play by the same rules as you play by.
It's a very socialized chart, I think. By socialized, I mean very alert and aware of others and community. The sun is in the 7th house of the other. The moon is in the 11th house of the others, of groups. Jupiter is in the 11th house of groups. And you know what I'm thinking? How important it is for you to know when to walk away. The reason that I say that, Rick talked about honoring your moon in Gemini. And the moon in Gemini is basically, I'm here because I feel like being here, but don't count on me being here if I don't feel like it in 3 seconds. It's nourishing that. Now, interestingly, when I look at charts, I often think of development as going from the moon to the sun. Oh, you're supposed to go from being an irresponsible Gemini moon, guilty about it, squared Saturn, to a responsible and committed Capricorn. But I also am a big fan of the moon's nodes, and moving from the south to the north. And your south node in Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter, associated by Jupiter in Taurus, brings us back to the earthy side, brings us back to the community responsibilities, where your north node, which I think of as a point of growth or integration, is in I'm out of here, 12th house. I can watch, I don't have to participate. It's almost like this is a chart about learning not to be immoral, but amoral, in a sense. And the reason is Sagittarius, who can be like total sleazes, sluts, whores, pirates, whatever, but, and usually are, but on one level, Sagittarius is a sign of morality. They're very good at preaching morality, or at least have an expectation. Sagittarius is a sign of truth, and they're very happy to tell you the truth about you. Their own's another story. But the North Node in Gemini in the 12th house really is about the right to not be so rooted in the ultimate notion of right or wrong. Rick brought up the Saturn-Moon square. I mean, which is like it's like a gilt-edged family experience, but the guilt is with a U-I-L-T, not the I-L-T. And yet, I think that North Node in Gemini says, it's okay, Illuminata, if you choose not to participate or not to believe in whatever.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because, well, you talked about the North Node and the I'm outta here.
Right.
But what's interesting to me is what I see, and this may not work this way for you, I see that the I'm outta here isn't necessarily about going somewhere else. It's about going inward.
Right.
There's something, and the reason why I'm saying that is that North Node, even though it's in Gemini, it's in the 12th house, which is often spiritual and unconscious or internal or hidden. And we couple that with the Cancer rising. And so there's a part of you, when I see the Cancer rising, I think of that, there was a scene in, I think it might have been the very first Star Wars movie, where Obi-Wan Kenobi is walking by the stormtrooper, and he says something like, this is not important to you, or I'm none of your business, or whatever,
Right.
and he's invisible. You know what I'm talking about? You get the. That's it. We are
Right.
not the ones you're looking for.
As an option.
That is you. When you want to escape, you don't go somewhere else. You just go invisible. I'm not the one you're looking for. Oh, I'm not. You know, you're no longer there. You no longer appear because it's like your cleverness is different than what people perceive. In a way, the Capricorn part of you is who you are. There's the sense of showing up and being real and having stability and having structure. Then the Saturn squaring the moon, yes, Illuminata, she knows what's right and what we should do and whatever. And so they don't expect it when you're not there. And you just kind of like put on the Harry Potter invisibility cloak. And so I don't think it's about you leaving, I don't think it's about you getting out of Dodge. I think it's about you getting Dodge out of you.
Yeah.
Make sense a little bit?
And you know, we tend to think of hippies as permissive. Yet I remember when I had a storefront practice in the hippie neighborhood in Atlanta, and the freakiest guy in the neighborhood, I mean the guy with the beard down here and the hair down here, whose name was Free Hugs. That was his name. So Illuminati's like nothing. Free Hugs was this guy's name. But I got to know him.
No, it was free drugs.
No, those he charged for. But what I discovered was he had lots of Virgo-like behavior. He had lots of his own rules and his own rituals. And one can be a highly ritualized and rule-bound person in what appears to be a liberated or in a philosophically open-minded or avant-garde culture. And you know, I think, it's really interesting. Look at that in the fourth house of home and family. You've got the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, which is the signature of the 1960s.
With Mars. Close.
With Mars and Virgo. And yet built into that signature in the area family is that complexity of being freaky and different Uranus-Pluto, but also having Mars in Virgo and having sort of, whether it's a work ethic or a drive to do things with a certain degree of perfection, there's still elements of that's present. It's not like a hippie whatever. It's a hippie, no, we're going to make the most perfect organic this or this craft or that kind of thing. There is that. And I think release from that's important. And as Rick's about to go to, let me predict, we're going to...
No, it saves me from going there. Thank you. I'm done.
No. I'm passing this to you. But Illuminata has Mercury and Venus in early Capricorn, which is where the action is. So you're in a pretty profound period of transformation about work and getting along with people, which I think is in a stage of transition. Because with Saturn square that and Pluto having passed over that, if you keep showing up as the one who's committed to making things work, irrespective of how psychotic others are, that gets old. And certainly these transits would represent an opportunity for you to sort of pursue relationships based upon your terms.
If you have any friends left after the last couple of years, they're the real ones. And if you don't, that's okay, because the real ones are on the way.
Right.
It's almost like as Pluto went over these points, and Saturn squared them, and Uranus and Jupiter are still messing with them.
Right.
There's this sense of you reached a point where, I used the image earlier because we've had all three people tonight have planets at early degrees of Capricorn or Cardinal. And so the image was this image, I used the word molting. I'm going to use the word metamorphosis, and I'm going to pull in my favorite Pluto transformation image, and that is the caterpillar into the butterfly. So over the past 2 years or so, as Pluto, the planet of metamorphosis and transformation, has gone over your Mercury, your mind, and your Venus, your desires and what you want, this has basically been a furry caterpillar going through a process of being in the dark, of dissolving, of decaying, deconstructing, and then recreating something that still may be in process. There may be this kind of pushing out of the containment of the chrysalis, but you're still close enough to it that it still may not be completely obvious that you've become a butterfly because you're not yet fully free and flying. And so when I talked about your friends and so on, I think Jeff was right. I mean, that this is about a change of what your role is in the world, your work, your service, certainly your friends, how you think, how you communicate. And in some way, Pluto's moving through this area and Saturn squaring it has made you think, is this really worth it? Is my friendship or my marriage or my relationship or whatever it is with this person, is it really worth what the sacrifices are that I have to keep going through because I'm not even getting what it is that is going to support me in my next stage of being as butterfly? I'm with people who can still relate to me as caterpillar. I'm changing into something I don't know what it is yet, but if you're not into relating to who I'm becoming, if you're still relating to who I was, then you're out of here or I'm out of here. And again, that out of here doesn't mean leaving Dodge, it means getting Dodge out of you. I'm done.
Okay.
What about 7 Earth planets?
Well, there's a lot of Earth, and Mars is trying the Sun. And what I was thinking about is, Illuminata probably is the muscle to work through things. And I think, again, it's really nice to not work through them. Just because you can doesn't mean you have to. And what Earth sometimes can get caught up in is the very literal model of reality that they're presented with. I mean, Earth's skill is dealing with the world as it is, but its weakness is getting caught in the world as it is and not recognizing sometimes that there are whole other worlds or ways to play the game of life that are possible. Thank you all so much for coming to Soul Food. Have a wonderful month.
I will see you on the first Wednesday of November. Jeff will see you on the first Wednesday of October. And Jeff and I have a plane to catch.
All right.
Where lotuses grow in the ponds.
That's right.
Thank you all. Yeah. Who's that?
I don't know.
That's Jeff.
Oh, look at that. Jeff already signed.
Jeff already signed this.
Oh, look at that.
How do you do that?
That's good. Look at that. Yeah, thank you. Look at that. It's my lucky night. Pretty awesome. You take beautiful photography. That is
Thank you.
amazing.
How did you know I took that?
A little birdie told me.
I did. Your name again?
Sandy.
Sandy. Y or I?
I really enjoyed this tonight. This was my first time I watched you guys on the computer.
Cool. Where do you live?